Okay, so it says use the substitution method to find all solutions of the system. So here we have a system, and we're supposed to find the answers. How do we do it? Well, basically, I'm going to plug, step one, I'm going to plug the first equation into the second. Why? Because the first equation says y equals x minus 2. So I'm going to plug that in for y in the second equation. Does that make sense? So then I'll get x times x minus 2 equals 3. So I plugged x minus 2 in for y right there. Maybe better if I showed this. That's this, right? X times y equals 3, but y has been replaced with x minus 2. Is that good? So plug the first equation into the second. Okay, and now, where do we go from there? Here, I feel like I'm not setting that up very nicely. Let me try that again. So I'm going to bring this down. So y equals x minus 2, and x times y equals 3. Put it over here. So step number one, plug first equation into the second. So I grab this, plug it in right there. So I get x times x minus 2 equals 3. Good. All right, so now we're going to distribute. What do we get? X squared minus 2x is 3. So step 2, you have an x squared equation. What do you do with an x squared equation? Well, we've had these several times in the course. First, get 0 on one side. So first you got to get 0 on one side. So that means we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. Boom, boom. So we get a 0. So this is x squared minus 2x minus 3. So first you get a 0 on one side. And then second, you can factor. Yeah, let's go ahead and factor. Factor, with the 2 parentheses. So I'm going to put the 2 parentheses. Okay, so do you remember how the factoring works? You need to find 2 numbers that multiply to be 3 and add to be minus 2. What 2 numbers multiply to be 3? 1 and 3, right? And then haven't done the signs yet. No pluses or minuses quite yet. And now I'll think about the signs. They have to add to be negative 2. How can they add to be negative 2? Plus 1 minus 3. Do you see that? Let's check it. The best thing is always checking to make sure. Is that really right? Let's check. If the first one goes to both, we'll get x squared minus 3x. And then the second one goes to both, plus 1x minus 3. And those 2 in the middle will make minus 2x. Check. Perfect. See how it matches that original perfectly? So it's right. So it's the right factorization. We found the 2 numbers, positive 1 and negative 3, that multiply to be negative 3, and they add or subtract to be negative 2. Okay, so now what do we do? Third, each part equals 0. So you say, okay, so the x plus 1 equals 0, or the x minus 3 equals 0. Now, why can we do that? Well, that comes from the logic that if, if I said, hey, I'm thinking of two numbers and I'm multiplying them, and it's coming out 0. How can you multiply two numbers and get 0? Well, the first one could be 0, or the second one could be 0, right? If either one of the two numbers is 0, then they're going to multiply to come out 0. So that's what's happening here. We have two things multiplying to equal 0. That means the first one could be 0, or the second one could be 0. So let's finish it up. So subtract 1 from both. That cancels. -1 and add 3 to both. So -1 and 3. So there's our two x answers. All right, so we're going through our steps here. First step, we plugged in. Let me back that up. First step, we plugged in to the first equation. First equation into the second. Second step, we got an x squared equation, which meant we got 0, factored, each part equal to 0. And now for the third step, plug in each x. Now, where are we going to plug it in? To the first equation, because the first one's easier. It doesn't really matter. Plug in each x to the first equation, because that one looks a little easier to find y. So go back to the first equation, grab the first one. Y is minus x plus 2. Or no, sorry. Y equals x minus 2. So we're going to plug it in. Boom, and plug it in. Boom. And we get y equals -1 minus 2, and y equals 3 minus 2. So y is -3, and y is 1. -3 and 1. And that goes, so x -1 led to y -3, x positive 3 led to y 3. So putting that all together, what are those answers? This one is -1, -3, right? The x and the y. -1 led to y -3. And here, x positive 3 led to y positive 1. Positive 3 led to positive 1. So there we go. There's the y values that go with them. Let's bring them back then. -1, -3, and 3, 1. So now notice it wants us to put it in so that x1 is lower, right? x1 is less than x2. So which x is lower? The -1 is the lower x. So -1, -3. So -1, -3, that's the lower x. And then the higher x is the 3, 1. Makes sense? So the -1, -3 goes there and there, and the 3, 1 goes there and there. They want the lower x here. -1 is lower than 3, and the higher x there. So there we go. So recapping, how did we solve those two equations at the same time? What did we do? We basically plugged the first equation into the second, right here, y equaled x minus 2, plug that in for y in the second equation, got x times x minus 2 is 3, distributed, then we had an x squared equation. And what do we do for an x squared equation? We first got to get a 0. I hope you're getting more and more comfortable with x squared equations. They pop up a lot. First, you got to get a 0 on one side. So we get a 0 over there. And then we factored it. That was a little tricky. We checked our factoring by just doing distribution, first to both, second to both, to make sure we had it right. Those are and it came out right. We checked it there. We found two numbers that multiplied to be -3, added to be -2. And then we set each part equal to 0, because if two things multiply to be 0, either one could be 0. Solve, got two x answers, then plug each of those into the first equation. We brought down the first equation, plugged in both x's, and got y's that go with them. And so there we go.